we've seen that evolution just isn't logical. We've also seen the consequences of applying that worldview. It devalues the weak, the needy, and the different. The horrors of genocide and racism thrive in a worldview that espouses the survival of the fittest. Which leads us to this. What's the best argument you've ever heard for the existence of God? Maybe you've never heard any arguments. Well, sit back and ask yourself one question. Which came first?
Which do you think came first in the evolutionary process? The retinas or the cornea?
That's a hard one.
Which one of these do you think evolved first? The bones, the ligaments, tendons, or the blood supplied to muscles to move the bones?
Oh my gosh, this is hard.
What do you think evolved first? The immune system or the need for an immune system?
I have no idea.
Okay.
That's why I dropped class.
That's why you dropped the class. Yeah, all right.
What is irreducible complexity and how does it confirm a biblical creation?
Irreducible complexity is when you have a machine where you have multiple parts that work together and they have to all basically be working in order for the whole to function.
Like a bike?
So, yeah, like a bicycle, absolutely. So you need the pedals and you need the chain and you need the wheels and you need the handlebars. If you're lacking any one of those components, then the whole does not function as a whole. Somebody had to create this thing and they had to create it with all the parts already working together in order for it to function. And the other thing about that is living things tend to be irreducibly complex. Something as simple as a bacteria, it's irreducibly complex. It's got DNA in it, but DNA can't just exist by itself. DNA requires enzymes to maintain it and to replicate it. Where do the enzymes come from? There are structures that produce those. Where does the information to produce these enzymes comes from? Well, it comes from the DNA. So the enzymes need the DNA, and the DNA needs the enzymes.
Got it.
And so I have to ask which one evolved first, and the answer is it doesn't even make sense. They had to have been created working simultaneously.
Which do you think evolved first? The lungs, the mucus lining to protect them, the throat, or the perfect mixture of gases in the atmosphere to be breathed into those lungs?
I don't know, man.
Okay.
And there are lots of systems like that, things that work together. You know, you have your heart, which pumps blood. Well, you need a blood system for that to work. Which evolved first, your blood system or your heart? Well, they had to have been created simultaneously. You got your kidneys, you got your liver and spleen, and all these different parts that work together to make your body possible. Darwin was aware of this issue, and he actually promoted it as a potential defeater for his idea. He said, you know, if it can be shown that any of these systems cannot be produced by gradual small changes, then he says my theory would absolutely break down. And the funny thing is that has now been demonstrated.
So by Darwin's own definition, evolution has already been dismantled.
It's been refuted. We now know of a number of systems in the human body and in other organisms that are irreducibly complex. You know, it's ironic because we found that God has encoded the instructions to make you on a molecule, which I think that's awesome. That's powerful confirmation of creation. But ironically, the discoverers of DNA were atheists.
Yeah.
They actually thought that when they found DNA, well, we don't need God anymore. And I thought, that's the exact opposite of the conclusion I would draw. Suppose you found a way to decode, say, a Blu-ray disc, and you say, wow, there's a lot of information on this Blu-ray disc. Obviously, this proves that this came about by accident. Well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, the more complex something is, the more you'd be inclined to think that it has a designer. And DNA being a molecule, a very long molecule, looks like a twisted ladder, and on the rungs of this ladder are these nucleotide base pairs that encode all the proteins that make you in a way that we still don't fully understand. The level of intelligence that went into that. We're now finding things about DNA that if you read it this way, you get some instructions, and you can read it backwards and you get more instructions. And that's astonishing. That'd be like, can you imagine somebody writing a book that when you turn it upside down and backwards, you can read it again and you get another story? That's astonishing, the level of intelligence that went into that. And so DNA is a very powerful confirmation of biblical creation.
No one would look at computer code and say, wow, that must have just happened on accident, or that video game created itself, and wow, that's really great that it created itself.
So you're a game designer. Yeah. Let me ask you something. If I gave you a game design and I told you this game, it's really cool, it does all these things, all the code is perfect, right? It does all these amazing things, but there was no game designer. It just appeared this way and it just happened to be the way it is accidentally. Would you believe me?
No.
No, why not?
Because in order for that to happen, there has to be some sort of input.
Genetics confirms creation, and it dovetails with another branch of science called information theory, which deals with how information is transmitted and its origin and so on. And one of the things that we learn from information theory is that information never generates spontaneously in matter. A non-thinking machine can copy information. A Xerox machine can copy information, but it can't create new information.
Right.
A non-thinking machine can lose information. The Xerox machine runs out of ink, and oh, we're done now. We don't. That information's gone.
Right.
But it takes a mind to produce information. And what do we find in DNA? Information. All the instructions to make you, your eye color, your hair, the instructions to make your body, all contained in your DNA. Where did you get that information? From your parents. They got it from their parents. But where did that information come from originally? Had to come from the mind. And that's consistent with the creation worldview, where the information in our DNA originally came from the mind of God. And some of it's been lost since, and now we have little problems. I have lower back pain because something didn't form quite right there because I'm missing some instructions and so on. But we don't have brand new information added to our DNA, which is what evolution would require. What that tells me is that you can get lots of different variation within a kind. You can get dogs with short fur, dogs with long fur, because the original dogs had the information for both. You want a dog with wings, you're out of luck.
Right.
Because that information does not exist within the dog kind, and mutations are not gonna do it. They're not gonna add it.
So your most popular book is called The Ultimate Proof of Creation. What is the ultimate proof of creation?
The ultimate proof of creation is different from what people think it is. They think, well, it's genetics or things like that. Now, those things all confirm creation, don't get me wrong. But the ultimate proof of creation is that if creation weren't true, you couldn't prove anything is true. The tools that we use to prove things, tools like science, logic, things of that name, the rationality of the mind, all those things depend on biblical creation being true. If our brains are just rearranged pawn scum, there's no reason to believe that they have the capacity to be rational. There's no reason to expect that at all. Or for that matter, the fact that the universe obeys laws as imposed by a creator, like we read in Genesis. The fact that God upholds the universe in a consistent fashion, as we read in Genesis 8:22, these cycles of nature that he promises will be in the future as they have been in the past. We rely upon that in order to do science. Science presupposes that there's that underlying uniformity in nature.
Right.
There would be no reason to trust in the scientific method if creation weren't true. People tend to think about creation as simply one hypothesis among many. You got the creation hypothesis, you got the evolution hypothesis, and we'll use science to decide between the two. But the fact is, science itself rests on creation. If creation's not true, there's no reason to trust in the scientific method by which we then test other hypotheses. And so some people will say, is creation a scientific fact? And I would say, no, it's an historical fact. It's the historical fact that makes it possible for you to do science and test other claims.
I know, that was a lot to digest. Irreducible complexity, DNA needs RNA, which needs DNA. That's a lot to think about. And yet, most Christians would probably tell you that none of those reasons convinced them that God was real. Instead, they'd probably point to a single radical transformation in their own life that led them to embrace these arguments.